And greetings and welcome back. We are now going to dig a little bit deeper. This is episode number 11 of The Invisible Enemy, talking about the early days of COVID-19. If you've made it this far, thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Hopefully, this won't be the episode that gets banned from YouTube. I'm just saying, just from YouTube. It'll still be on Rumble. It'll still be on other places, but we'll see what YouTube says about this one here. We're going to get right started. This is the turnaround. Are you ready for this? All right, now here we go. Just going to move this down just a little bit. And we're going to get right into this. So here we go, April 22nd of 2020. The turnaround. Dr. Dan Erickson of Accelerated Healthcare spoke with KERO 23 ABC News on April 22nd. The video was later removed by YouTube. Dr. Erickson and another doctor, which I did find out his name later on, because I do have that. We have the podcast version and we have the Rumble version. So if you have not seen this interview that we're talking about here, you can find it at What is Truth Podcasts on Spotify, and the link should be here in the description of the video that you're watching. And the video itself will be on my Rumble channel, Greg Fernandez Jr. So if you have not seen that or listened to it, it is definitely worth it. Highly recommend it. Okay, and I'm just going to read from the description of the video from Rumble. And April 22nd, 2020, Dr. Dan Erickson and Dr. Artin Masihi, Masihi, discussed COVID-19. Both are Kern County doctors who raised excellent questions about vital information about COVID-19. There is a reason why this video was banned from YouTube. Watch and you will decide for yourself if they are spreading misinformation about COVID-19 or if they are telling the truth. Use common sense and decide for yourself. So that's what I wrote in the description of the video. Ooh, be careful not to show it. And once again, I do hope that that will help. And so that is just a little introduction there, and let's get back into it. So again, this is on April 22nd, 2020. And this is the video that talking about the video that was removed. So many great quotes in this. A full transcript would actually do very well in this whole thing here. But there is a lot to cover here. So I'm going to read it. We'll see what happens. Okay, so there are two doctors from Kern County, California, and they're talking about what's going on nationwide. Now, Dr. Erickson's goal was to give the people, quote, an ER physician entrepreneur perspective on what's going on, which is much different than the perspective we've been getting thus far. And what we think about, excuse me, let me go back to the quote. Dr. Erickson's goal was to give the people, quote, an ER physician entrepreneur perspective on what's going on and what we think the approach should be going forward, end quote. Now, when it comes to the shelter in place order, we want to talk about that as if we want to talk about if that still makes sense. Does this make sense? Dr. Erickson asked. Are we following the science? We're studying the disease around us. We're making observations. We're doing testings, experiments to figure out exactly what's going on. The health system has been evacuated in certain places, Dr. Erickson continued. In New York, the health system is working at maximum capacity. In California, we're really at a minimal capacity, getting rid of our doctors and nurses because we just don't have the volume. We're busy with paperwork on COVID, and we're all focused on COVID. Page 122 of my book, The Invisible Enemy. Okay, let's go down to page 123. Dr. Erickson then spoke about his conversation with physicians across the country. Yes, you're going to notice some typos. And guess what? We're going to fix those right here. So I'll read that again. Dr. Erickson then spoke about his conversations with physicians across the country. Well, because COVID's become the focus, people with heart disease, people with cancer, hypertension, and various things that are critical are choosing not to come into the hospital based on fear. So what that's going to do is causing the health system to focus on COVID and not focus on a myriad of other things that are critical because we don't have the staff there. and the major component is fear. People were avoiding hospitals due to fear of catching COVID-19. Our first initial response 2 months ago was a little bit of fear, Dr. Erickson admitted. So we're finding things all over the place here. Typos, sorry. If you're listening to the audio, I apologize for that. Just gonna fix some of these typos over here. We decided to shut down travel to and from China. These are good ideas when you don't have any facts. We decided to keep people at home and isolate them, even though everything we've studied about quarantine, typically you quarantine the sick. When someone has measles, you quarantine them. We've never seen where we quarantine the healthy, where you take those without disease and without symptoms and lock them in their home. Dr. Erickson also stated the data they were using in Kern County may be similar to a flu. Over the last couple months, we've gained a lot of data. Typically in Kern County, for instance, we've tested 5,213 people and we have 340 positive COVID cases. Well, that's 6.5% of the population, which would indicate that there is a widespread viral infection similar to flu. We think it's kind of ubiquitous throughout California. So if we look at California, these numbers are from yesterday. We have 33,865 COVID cases out of a total of 280,900 total tested. That's 12% of Californians were positive for COVID. When it came to early estimates of death due to COVID-19, the initial models were woefully inaccurate, Dr. Erickson concluded. They predicted millions of cases of death, not of prevalence or incidence, but death. That is not materializing. What is materializing in the state of California is 12% positives. We have 39.5 million people. If we just take a basic calculation and extrapolate that out, that equates to about 4.7 million cases throughout the state of California, which means this thing is widespread. That's the good news. We've seen 1,227 deaths in the state of California with a possible incidence or prevalence of 4.7 million. That means you have a 0.03 chance of dying from COVID-19 in the state of California. Then came the real question. Does that necessitate sheltering in place? Does that necessitate shutting down medical systems? Does that necessitate people being out of work? 90% of people in California who get COVID recover with almost no significant continuing medical problems. Those are important statistics in the state of California. 2 months ago, we didn't know this. The more you test, the more positives you get, Dr. Erickson explained. Another typo I'm going to fix. The prevalence number goes up and the death rate stays the same. So it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. Millions of cases, small amount of death, and you will see that in every state. Dr. Erickson also said somewhere between 37,000 and 60,000 die of the flu every year. No pandemic talk, no shelter in place, no shutting down businesses, no sending doctors home. We have a flu vaccine, Dr. Erickson continued. How many people even get the flu vaccine? The flu is dangerous. It kills people. So just because you have a vaccine doesn't mean it's going to be everywhere. And it doesn't mean everyone's going to take it, because we see every year that we have a flu vaccine. And I would say probably 50% of the public doesn't even want it. So just because you have a vaccine, unless you force it on the public, doesn't mean they're going to take it. Lockdown. Dr. Erickson also talked about the effects of the shelter-in-place order. What has it caused to have us to be in social isolation? Child molestation is increasing at a severe rate. We could go over multiple cases of children who have been molested due to angry family members who are intoxicated, who are home, who have no paycheck. These things last a lifetime. This isn't about a seasonal flu. These are things that will follow these people and affect them in a negative fashion for their life. And these are secondary effects from COVID. And these are from me talking to ERs, talking to my doctors, talking to people across the country and finding out what they're seeing. And that's about the 15:45 mark of that video, in case you want to jump just to that part. Continuing on, spousal abuse. We see people coming in here with black eyes and cuts on their faces. It's an obvious abuse case. These are things that will affect them for a lifetime, not for a season. Alcoholism, anxiety, depression, suicide. Suicide is spiking. Education has dropped off. Economic collapse, medical industry. We're all suffering because our staff isn't here and we have no volume. These are all real things that I'm seeing every day. I don't read about this stuff. I'm seeing it in my clinics. We have clinics from Fresno to San Diego, and these things are spiking in our community. These things will affect people for a lifetime, not for a season. So let's make sure we're clear on that. Dr. Erickson felt compelled to talk about how the lockdown affects our immune system. I'd like to go over some basic things about how the immune system functions so people have a good understanding. The immune system is built by exposure to antigens, viruses, bacteria. When you're a little child crawling on the ground, putting stuff in your mouth, viruses and bacteria come in. You form an antigen INTAL body complex. You form IgG, IgM. This is how your immune system is built. You don't take a small child, put them in a bubble wrap in a room and say, go have a healthy immune system. This is immunology, microbiology 101. This is the basis of what we've known for years. So what I'm seeing is when you take human beings and you say, go into your home, go into your house, clean all your counters, Lysol them down, you're going to kill 99% of bacteria. Wear a mask. Don't go outside. What does it do to our immune system? Our immune system is used to touching. We share bacteria, viruses. We develop an immune response daily to this stuff. When you take that away from me, my immune system drops. As I shelter in place, my immune system drops. You keep me there for months, it drops more. And now I'm at home, hand washing vigorously, washing the counters, worried about things that are indeed what I need to survive. Let's follow the science. This is immunology, folks. This is microbiology. Dr. Erickson also stated ER doctors he talked to were being pressured to add COVID-19 to death reports. Why are we being pressured to add COVID? Dr. Erickson asked. To maybe increase the numbers and make it look like a bit worse than it is? I think so. What you just heard, Tucker Carlson reported a few days later, what Dr. Erickson described is called lying. And lying has no place in science ever. It's scary to think it takes place on a large scale in hospitals. He says it does. The video generated 5 million views before it was removed from YouTube for violating community guidelines. Looking back when all of this is over, and it will be, it's likely that we'll see this moment, Tucker Carlson continues, is what I should have added there, what YouTube just did as a turning point in the way we live in this country. It's a sharp break with 250 years of law and custom. The only justification for taking them down, Tucker Carlson continued, was that the two physicians on screen had reached a different conclusion from the people currently in charge. It was a form of dissent from orthodoxy. YouTube and its parent company, Google, have now officially banned dissent. The CEO of YouTube admitted that openly. And that's from Tucker Carlson's report on April 28th, 2020. Tucker responds to the censorship of the doctors. So I included that in there as well, which is good. So obviously, maybe I should have included a lot more with Dr. Erickson and Dr. Masahi. Hope I'm not butchering that too much, but I think I may. I don't know if I'll do it here or maybe I'll add it at the end of the book if people want to go and read the full transcript. It's definitely worth reading. I definitely believe that. In the proper context, too. So I included that because I thought it was some of the most important things, some of the more simple things that a simple mind like me could actually grasp and understand about playing in dirt, things like that, how these things are actually good. People have been saying this for hundreds of years, probably thousands of years, to safeguard us from all of these things, these natural things. Dirt is a natural thing, right? Bacteria, all this stuff. So to kind of safeguard us from that, it's a great question. What does it do to our system? Keeping us in this plastic bubble is very different if it's needed, but to do it preemptively before there's even any need to is a whole nother issue. And so this is when I first began to really second guess the whole lockdown, based on some of the science, based on, some of the doctors. They weren't the only doctors that were talking about it, but you can see what happened with these two doctors, how they were banned, censored from YouTube. And then you do have a lot of other doctors that would speak out about it too, but there's a great risk, and there shouldn't be, because we're all just trying to figure out what is the best way to deal with COVID. That's what this really is, and it may be different for each person. Um, and to trust the science, I trust in God. So, and like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was saying in his book, The Real Anthony Fauci, science is ever changing. There is no just one definitive science. Like he said, like one of the main things that I got so far from reading Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s book, The Real Anthony Fauci, was that, the science is never that conclusive. It's never just one way. That is not the way that science works. It's always being challenged. It's always being talked about. It's always being worked on. I'm not articulating it the best way, but I will try to find that exact quote. And again, if you have not read that book by Robert F. Kennedy Jr., The Real Anthony Fauci, please do so. Keep it on your reading list. It is a great book and is so relevant with what we are dealing with here in COVID. All right, so let's continue on. Bill Bryan leads the Science and Technology Directorate at the Department of Homeland Security and was a big part of the April 23rd, 2020 White House press briefing. Fix another typo right there. Add a little comment. Over the last several months, Bill Bryan stated, we've intensified the department's R&D efforts to identify and deliver information that informs our response to COVID-19. S&T is working to identify, develop, deploy the tools and information to support our response to this crisis. So see, they're still working things out. So at this point, I mean, for YouTube, for Google to even be banning things is a big, big problem, I think. I mean, we want to hear from all sides. We want to hear the good, the bad, the ugly, so that we can decide for ourselves. If we're not going to believe what Dr. Erickson, people like Dr. Erickson are saying, that's fine, but we need to have reasons for it, and we need to hear their view on it, so that way we can make an informed decision on what we're going to do here. But that's a whole nother issue, I guess. All right, let's continue on with what Bill Bryan, who leads the Science and Technology Directorate at the Department of Homeland Security, says during the White House press briefing on April 23rd, 2020. He says our most striking conversation to date is the powerful effect that solar light appears to have on killing the virus, both surfaces and in the air. We've seen a similar effect with both temperature and humidity as well, where increasing temperature and humidity or both is generally less favorable to the virus. I'll stop right there for a second, because this is very important, because the climate has a big effect. And I think that's one of the reasons why you could see Florida opened up so early and didn't have a lot of rising cases as some of these other places have. And then why we had this quote unquote, what Joe Biden referred to as a dark winter. So this virus loves the cold and hates the hot weather. And that's what I would take away from it, from what they're seeing so far here. Let's continue on with what Bryan says. First, let me tell you what a half-life is. We don't measure the virus as far as how long we live on the surface. We have to measure the decay of the virus in terms of its half-life. because we don't know certain elements. We don't know how much a person expectorates when he spits, right? When he sneezes, whatever the case may be. We don't know how much virus is in there. So that has a bearing on how long the virus is going to be alive and active. So we measure it in half-life because half-life doesn't change. Interesting. And I'm still learning more about half-life, but I can see why I included that in here. It's a good explanation for someone who doesn't know anything about what a half-life is. Continuing on. So if you look at the 18-hour half-life, Brian explained, what you're basically saying is that every 18 hours, the life of the virus is cut in half. So if you start with 1,000 particles of the virus, in 18 hours, you're down to 500. And 18 hours after that, you're down to 250, and so on and so forth. That's important, as I explain in the rest of the chart. If you look at the first three lines, when you see the word surface, we're talking about non-porous surfaces, door handles, stainless steel. And if you look at as the temperature increases, as the humidity increases, with no sun involved, you can see how drastically the half-life goes down on the virus. So the virus is dying at a much more rapid pace just from exposure to higher temperatures and just from exposure to humidity. If you look at the fourth line, you inject summer, the sunlight, into that. You inject UV rays into that. The same effects on line 2 as 70 to 35 degrees with 80% humidity on the surface. And look at line 4, but now you inject the sun. The half-life goes from 6 hours to 2 minutes. That's how much of an impact UV rays has on the virus. The last two lines are aerosols. What does it do in the air? We have a very unique capability. I was discussing this with the president prior to coming out. He wanted me to convey it to you on how we do this. I believe we're the only lab in the country that has this capability. But if you can't imagine a Home Depot bucket, a 5-gallon Home Depot bucket, we're able to take a particle. And this was developed and designed by our folks at the NBACC. We're able to take a particle of a virus and suspend it in the air and inside this drum and hit it with various temperatures, various humidity levels, multiple different kinds of environmental conditions to include sunlight. And we're able to measure the decay of that virus while it's suspended in the air. This is how we do our aerosol testings. We worked with Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab, and we actually developed a larger drum to do it, actually more testing. And we actually developed a larger drum to do actually more testing, and it's 4 times the size of that. So this is the capability that we bring to this effort. So in summary, Brian said at the end of his presentation, with the conditions we've tested to date, the virus in droplets via saliva survives best in indoors and dry conditions. The virus does not survive as well in droplets of saliva. And that's important because a lot of testing being done is not necessarily being done, number one, with the COVID-19 virus, and number two, in saliva or respiratory fluids. And thirdly, the virus dies the quickest in the presence of direct sunlight under these conditions. And when you look at the chart, look at the aerosols as you breathe it. You put it in a room, 70 to 75 degrees, 20% humidity, low humidity. It lasts. The half-life is about an hour. But you get outside and it cuts down to 1.5 minutes, a very significant difference when it gets hit with UV rays. And Mr. President, while there are many unknown links in the COVID-19 transmission chain, we believe these trends can support practical decision-making to lower the risk associated with the virus. If I can have my next slide. And when that comes up, you'll see a number of some practical applications. For example, increase the temperature and humidity of potentially contaminated indoor spaces appears to reduce the stability of the virus. I'll read that again. Increasing the temperature and humidity of potentially contaminated indoor spaces appears to reduce the stability of the virus. And extra care may be warranted for dry environments that do not have exposure to solar light. We're also testing disinfectants readily available. We've tested bleach. We've tested isopropyl alcohol on the virus, basically in saliva or in respiratory fluids. And I can tell you that bleach will kill the virus in 5 minutes. Isopropyl alcohol will kill the virus in 30 seconds. And that's with no manipulation, no rubbing, just spraying it on and letting it go. You rub it and it goes away even faster. We're also looking at other disinfectants, specifically looking at the COVID-19 virus in saliva. This is not the end of our work as we continue to characterize this virus and integrate our findings into practical applications to mitigate exposure and transmission. I would like to thank the President and thank the Vice President for their ongoing support and leadership to the department and for their work in addressing this pandemic. I would also like to thank scientists, not only in S&T and the NBACC, but to the larger scientific and R&D community. Thank you very much. That is from the White House press briefing on the coronavirus task force, briefing number 31. Let's stop right there for a second. Let me ask you all what you got from that, from reading that. And I know there was a lot of jokes and things made about what Trump was saying. Oh, just put bleach in your vein and, all this stuff, which is just stupid. Putting these things in the proper context. This is the science, right? So this is what they've tested. This is what works. It's not an end all be all. It doesn't mean, oh, this is going to do everything, but this is what science is. So when I think about science, the best of science and the worst of science, I think of some of this stuff as what we just read from Bill Bryan for Homeland Security or the Department of Homeland Security, the best of the science. When I think about what Anthony Fauci has been saying, Dr. Birch has said, I think about the worst of the science. That's just my view on it. But this is what the science is. They run it, they test it, they analyze it, they give results, they make suggestions, and then we need options for the public. Based on our Constitution, we need options for the public to decide what they want to do, what they think is best here. In this case, because of what we're seeing, because of the numbers of COVID. And like we said, like Dr. Erickson said, low numbers here that we're talking about, only focusing on death. That's not the case. But what they've both said, what Dr. Erickson has said and what Bill Bryan has said, pretty much they line up with each other in saying, you need to be outside. Isolating people inside is actually helping the virus spread. That's what I got from it. Being outside in the sun helps kill the virus. Under UV rays helps kill the virus. Bleach, things like that. Isopropyl, propylene, alcohol helps kill the virus here. These are based on the tests that they've done here. So that's where the focus should be. That's where the focus should be going. But as we see with the anti-Trump science community, that's not where they go. That's not where they want to go. And then when Joe Biden takes over, we can see that just continues there in a much higher rate. So that's what I saw. That's what I took away from it is we need to be outside. You need to be in the sun, not isolated in this way. And that's when we started in our household. That's when we started going outside more, just sitting out in the sun, right? Doesn't mean we have to go everywhere and gallivant across the whole country or anything like that. We weren't doing that, but we said, oh, let's try it. Well, the sunlight works. It makes sense. Who created the sunlight? Who created the sun? Who created the sky? Who created everything? God did. We're going to run and isolate ourselves from God. Isn't that in the scripture? If you read the Bible, isn't that what they talk about we go and we run and we hide from God because of the shame and everything, the hide from the light. God gave us the light. He is the light and the sunlight. We're being told to go and lock ourselves in, shelter in place, and hide from it. It's pretty interesting when you think about it like that. It's, to me, it is. All right, so let's continue on here, reading a little bit more. Of the 2,921,030 cases reported worldwide as of April 25th, 2020, 1,880,815 were still considered active. Of those active cases, 1,822,951, that's 97% of the people, were in mild condition, and 57,864, 3%, were critical. There were 1,040,215 cases that were closed, with 836,941, 80%, recoveries or discharges, and 203,274, 20%, deaths in 184 countries. So let me repeat that. In 184 countries, there were roughly 200,000 deaths, 20%. Those are the numbers right there. These numbers become even more important to me as we go on, as I start to kind of question more what this virus is and what it's doing, how it's affecting us. And does the kill rate match the media's fear? Right? Dr. Erickson talked a lot about that, about the fear. We all know, cannot let the fear overtake us. The fear will kill you itself. Let's read on. Dr. Lorna Breen, medical director of the emergency department at New York Presbyterian Allen Hospital, Dr. Lorna M. Breen allegedly killed herself on April 26, 2020, while at her sister's house in Charlottesville, Pennsylvania. Dr. Breen's father, a retired trauma surgeon, was interviewed by CNN's Chris Cuomo on April 28th and explained why he thought his daughter committed suicide. She took her own life because I think she was tired, and she was the kind of person, as somebody who has very aptly put it, she was like the fireman who runs into the burning building to save another life and doesn't regard anything about herself. So she had paid the price, and she's been in the trenches. We're to believe that someone who spent a lot of time in the trenches treating COVID-19 patients, watching some die and some recover, and who recovered from the virus herself, went to her sister's house and killed herself. I'll admit, I'm a little suspicious. This is me talking here. I'm a little suspicious. I'm also a little annoyed at all the people who so easily accepted the suicide story while calling the fallen doctor a hero. In my eyes, heroes do not kill themselves. Dr. Breen was 49 years old when admitted to the Virginia University Hospital due to exhaustion, according to her father. She did not have medical health issues, and it's unclear how she killed herself. It would be good to know if there was a suicide note, what the official cause of death was, and if any drugs were found in her system. It would be good to know why she committed suicide, and if there was anything that may help prevent similar cases in the future. So that's from lockhaven.com. Dr. Lorna M. Breen was born and raised in Danville. Wow. And there's also another source, the New York Post. Manhattan ER doc Lorna Breen commits suicide, shaken by coronavirus. And of course, with CNN, consider the source on everything, obviously, but it's always one side. It's she was a hero, committed suicide. She was exhausted, et cetera, et cetera. And then you have the father backing all of this up, apparently. And there's my view on it. What is a hero? What does a hero do? Think about your heroes. There's nothing heroic about killing yourself. It's a cowardice way to go out. Okay, let's read on. According to a news obituary by Linnea Crowther on legacy.com, Breen was directing the ER during an unprecedented time as COVID-19 overwhelmed New York City and hospitals saw a massive influx of patients they couldn't always save. New York Presbyterian Allen is a 200-bed hospital that at one time was treating 170 patients with COVID-19. Breen had tested positive with COVID-19, but she recovered and went back to work before going to stay with her family in Virginia. Breen's father, also a physician, noted that she had told him about the severity of the coronavirus's impact on the city's hospitals and the emotional and physical toll it took on doctors there. Make sure she's praised as a hero because she was, he told the New York Times. She's a casualty as much as anyone else who has died. No. If she committed suicide, she's a casualty because she killed herself, not because of coronavirus. And this is where you can get a lot of the false reportings and a lot of the false things, a lot of the false cases. This is one of the worst things to say about your daughter. What a shameful person. Why would you say that about your daughter? She's a casualty as much as anyone else. No. She had a choice. If the suicide theory is correct, she had a choice. She chose the coward's way out. And sorry to say, and maybe that's not the case. Maybe she didn't commit suicide. But it always has bothered me how easily people will jump to the suicide. That's it. Can't have it both ways, people. Okay. On April 28, 2020, California Governor Gavin Newsom and California Department of Public Health Director and State Public Health Officer Dr. Sonia Angel held a press conference for California's roadmap to pandemic resilience, which discusses how the state is planning its path forward in phases based on science, health, and data. That is from gov.ca.gov. Update on California Pandemic Roadmap, the PDF. It's an interesting PDF if you have not read it. Okay, looking at page 131, we get the stage one. I remember all this stage one in California, what we're going to do. Oh, we're continuing to test, make essential workforce environments as safe as possible. Means lockdown, unconstitutional things. But let's keep the country going, right? Let's keep things up here. Let's shut down all small businesses and let Gavin Newsom go and drink his wine when he wants to. But everything else must go. Then they have stage two, the lower risk workplaces. Stage three, higher risk workplaces. Stage four, end of stay home order. Look at how long that has lasted. Look at how long that lasted, I should say. Oh boy. Okay. On May 3rd, 2020, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo participated in an interview on This Week with co-host Martha Raddatz. I want to turn to China, Martha Raddatz said to Secretary Pompeo, with intelligence officials, as we mentioned, saying that the Chinese government intentionally concealed the severity of COVID-19 from the international community in early January, while it stockpiled medical supplies. In terms of international concealing, I assume you think they did that intentionally to keep as many masks for themselves as possible. Will there be some sort of retaliation? She asked. We can confirm, Secretary Pompeo responded, that the Chinese Communist Party did all that it could to make sure that the world didn't learn in a timely fashion about what was taking place. There's lots of evidence of that. Some of it you can see in public, right? We've seen announcements. We've seen the fact that they kicked the journalists out. We saw the fact that those who were trying to report on this, medical professionals inside of China, were silenced. They shut down reporting. All the kind of things that authoritarian regimes do. The way communist parties operate. This is a classic communist disinformation effort. That created enormous risks. And now you can see hundreds of thousands of people around the world, tens of thousands in the United States, have been harmed. President Trump is very clear. We're going to hold those responsible accountable, and we'll do so in a timeline that is our own. And then Biden gets in and China is not held accountable. Coincidence, right? Well, let's see. I think we'll go ahead. We should probably stop right there. I think that's a good place to start or stop. Let's go for one more. A few more paragraphs here. During the same interview, Ohio Governor Mike DeWine was asked about his quote, about face on the mandatory face mask issue. You did something that not too many politicians do, Raddatz reminded Governor DeWine. You did an about face. You first announced that everyone would be required to wear face masks when retail opened, and then you reversed yourself when some of your citizens said it was offensive. Talk to me through this thinking of that because you were just talking about face masks. Face masks are very important, Governor DeWine agreed. And our business group came back and said every employee, for example, should wear a face mask. So we're continuing that, whether it's retail or wholesale, whatever it is, manufacturing, every employee is going to have face masks. But it became very clear to me after we put out the order that everyone in retail who walked into a store as a customer would have to do that. It became clear to me that this was just a bridge too far, that people were not going to accept the government telling them what to do. And so we put out dozens and dozens of orders. That was one that just went too far. Okay. To do so, we put out dozens and dozens of orders. That was, okay, the one that went too far. Right. Okay, sorry. I had to Okay, so unless you have a physical reason, you can't wear the mask. Unless you have a physical reason you can't wear the mask, Governor DeWine continued, and we understand that. But when you go into a restaurant, when you go into a retail store, that is the kind of thing to do because I worry, and we should all worry about the folks who are stocking shelves in grocery stores, the people who are, the checkout lines, who work there all day, and we got to try to protect them. So again, it's what individual Ohioans do. They've been great going through this. We flattened the curve. People have stayed home. They've kept their social distance, and we just got to continue to do that. So my ability to communicate to the people of Ohio, frankly, I thought was going to be really impeded, and we would get hung up on the mandatory mask for someone going in as a customer, and it just wasn't. All right, sorry about that. I had a little computer glitch there, but we're going to continue on. I think I'm going to even do a little backtracking here for a second. So let me just pull this up. And I'm just going to cover the last thing about what the governor said. Governor DeWine, unless you have a physical reason you can't wear the mask, Governor DeWine continued. And we understand, this is governor of Ohio, if that wasn't clear. And we understand that. But when you go into a retail store, that is the kind of thing to do because I worry, and we should all worry about the folks who are stocking shelves in grocery stores, the people who are the checkout line, who work there all day. And we got to try to protect them. So again, it's what individual Ohioans do. They've been great going through this. We flattened the curve. People have stayed home. They've kept their social distance, and we just got to continue to do that, right? Because as we know, as the doctors say, and as the science said, that's what's going to solve it, right? Avoiding the sunlight, even though evidence shows otherwise. So my ability to communicate to the people of Ohio, the governor continued, frankly, I thought was going to be really impeded, and we would get hung up on the mandatory mask for someone going in as a customer, and it just wasn't going to work. And so you got to know what you can do and what you can't do. It's kind of dancing around there, but yeah. So he's kind of leaving it open for people for the masks. If you can, if you want to, the face masks are very important, he says. But as far as making sure, um, because from what Raddatz has said, the interviewer, what is her name? Martha Raddatz. There was that the governor, Ohio governor, did an about face with the mandatory mask. And he did something not too many politicians would do. He did an about face. He first announced everyone would be required to wear masks when retail opened, and then he reversed himself, which is pretty cool. And some of your cities said it was offensive. So the forced masking in Ohio, they were one of the first to kind of that we heard about, at least in the media, to kind of to resist the mandatory mask. So The governor did a little dancing there from what I can see, but hey, at least he was kind of open to it and kind of left it to the people, left it to the public. I guess I should put this in focus view, right? So we're just looking at that. Okay, so let's go ahead and we're going to continue on just a little bit more because this is so much fun going back in those days, right? No, it's not fun, but it's educational. Okay, so Judicial Watch filed a lawsuit on behalf of the Daily Caller on May 4th, 2020, for communications between Dr. Fauci and the WHO, the WHO, the World Health Organization. Lou Dobbs asked the president of Judicial Watch, Tom Fitton, why do we need to know what Fauci was saying to the WHO? Well, there's a lot of reasons, Tom Fitton answered. First of all, it's a crisis that shut the country down. So we need to know the details of how it was handled by the government initially, but more importantly, what that corrupt agency, WHO, was telling our senior officials like Dr. Fauci, not only about coronavirus, but about China's connection to it. Interesting. Have you read those emails? We'll get there. Asked what he expects to find in the documents, Fitton responded, we're going to find who is probably playing defense for China early on, mimicking or pushing out the narrative that China was pushing out early on. If it misled Fauci, if it misled our top agency officials, there's got to be accountability for what went on. And we want to find the evidence here. We know what was publicly said. My guess is that it was even worse privately. Wow. You need a second set of eyes to look at the communications, Fitton continued. Dr. Fauci was hearing it from his colleagues about what was going on with coronavirus. He may not be the best judge to tell us what he was learning and what he should have known and what we should have known generally and acted upon. We need to do an audit of what happened with our US government and what we were hearing from WHO on behalf of China. It looks like they were a cutout for China. And I think these documents are going to show it. Dr. Fauci admits, he says, look, I didn't recognize initially how susceptible, how transmittable this was, and how it could be spread so easily. Did that come because of the lies out of China? It looks that way. And was WHO involved in pushing those lies? It looks that way too, Fitton continued. The president makes it clear, Lou Dobbs added, he has seen evidence to exactly that point. Great place to stop right there, about the middle of page 135. We'll come back and we'll look at some more suicides, apparent murder-suicides related to coronavirus because of coronavirus. We've already looked at one, may have looked at a few. How many suicides are related to coronavirus? We'll come back and look at that in episode 12. Thank you all for being here. I'll just stop the screen share, but I really appreciate everyone taking the time. This has been episode number 11. We'll see. This may be the most controversial episode for some. This may trigger a lot of memories. Some people may have never heard about Dr. Dan Erickson and what he has said, what Bill Bryan has said. These are very important things here when we're talking about not only the early days of coronavirus, but some of the things that we should have been doing and some of the things that the media was not talking about or was completely against. And again, if you watch Dan Erickson's full video, when listen to when they're asking him questions, listen to the questions they ask, which are valid questions, I think, but really listen to his responses. His responses give you the answers. And I think it was that portion of the 1 hour footage, which the audio is not that great either. I do apologize for that. I noticed that in one ear it sounds okay, another ear it's and it's back and forth, back and forth. So it's like the worst audio. And that's another reason why I think I am going to transcribe this in some form so people can actually read it themselves. I think reading it had a bigger effect on me than listening to it. Listening to it was awesome. Watching it is great too, but people need a transcript too, to have all three of those for whatever you need, whatever medium works best for you, and what is easiest to share with people, and make sure that that information does not go down the memory hole. Let's see if this video does. God bless you all, and until next time.